This is the third lecture in our unit on algebraic foundations. Today we're going to be multiplying and dividing signed numbers. In the previous lecture we added and subtracted them. This lecture is going to involve multiplying and dividing, which is a little bit easier to explain. The rules are a lot more simplified than adding and subtracting. So if we are adding and or multiplying and dividing the same sign, this one we should already know because we already do it. 4 times 5, for example, is 20. And they have the same sign and the result is positive. But it just so happens if both numbers are negative, the result is positive. So if we multiply or divide two numbers with the same sign, positive or negative, if they're both positive or they're both negative, the result is positive. If they have a different sign, the result is negative. So if we have a negative 4 times 5, that result's going to be negative 20. Now let me explain why this is. So if I have 5 times negative 4, multiplication is repeated addition. So this is going to be negative 4 plus negative 4 plus negative 4 plus negative 4 plus negative 4. Now in the previous lecture we learned how to add signed numbers. And if we add numbers that are the same sign, the result has the same sign, and we just add the numbers. There's 4 plus 4 is 8, plus 4 is 12, plus 4 is 16, plus 4 more is 20. So that's why a negative times a positive, or negative times a positive is negative. Now why is a negative times a negative? Well, what if I was going to take the opposite of this? The opposite of that. And remember in the previous lecture, when we take the opposite of something, we change the sign. So we could take the opposite of this, and that would give us positive 20. And that is the same as negative 5 times negative 4, which is positive 20. Okay, let's look at a little bit more examples of this so that we can get more familiar and see a little bit of division in action as well. Negative 14 times 7. Okay, we already know we have different signs. The result is going to be negative. And 14 times 7, 4 times 7 is 28. Carry a 2. 7 times 1 is 7, and 2 more is 98. So negative 14 times 7 is 98. What about fractions? What if we want to evaluate 3x if x is negative 2/3? Okay, so we evaluate means plug in the number and find the result. This is 3 times negative 2/3. And we can write this as a fraction, like 3 over 1 times 2 over 3. And there's a negative there. And we can see that the 3 divided by 3 is 1. So the result here is negative 2 because it's a positive times a negative. Now, when we divide fractions, we kind of went over this in the review section. We use what's called the reciprocal. The reciprocal. And two reciprocals multiply to be 1. In other words, 2/3 times 3/2. Notice that the reciprocal of 3/2 is 2/3. And the reciprocal of 2/3 is 3/2. That's why I say two reciprocals. they multiply up to be 6 divided by 6, which is 1. A reciprocal is also called a multiplicative inverse. So these two words are used interchangeably. And when we divide a number by another, we multiply by the multiplicative inverse. In other words, 6 divided by 3 is 6 times, what's the reciprocal of 3? 3 is 3 over 1, so that would be 1 over 3. And then we have 6 divided by 3, which is 2. Now, this is just a simple version of showing how division works. Not that it just can be rewritten as division again. I assume you already know what 6 divided by 3 is when we do this. So let's look at one you may not know. What about 2/3 divided by negative 4/5? Okay. Now, when we find the reciprocal, the sign, it doesn't change the sign. All it does is change the fraction. So we can rewrite this as 2/3 times negative 5/4. And that is, well, we can see here that we can reduce before we multiply, because 2/4 is 1/2. And what's left in the top? 1 times negative 5 is negative 5. And in the denominator, we have 3 times 2, which is 6. Now, there's one little thing I want to point out about negatives before I start going into some other properties of multiplication that are important. If we have negative 1/2 like this, and the minus sign is outside in front, this means negative 1/2. It is the same as negative 1 over 2, which is the same as 1 over negative 2. So whether you write the negative sign in front or in the numerator or in the denominator, all of these three values are negative 1/2. Okay, and we're going to conclude this lecture discussing some properties of zero with division and multiplication. The first property is any number times 0 is 0, and that is defined. So 3 times 0 is 0. Algebraically, we can write for any number, when we multiply by 0, we get 0. Now, division is not commutative. You can't do it backwards. One of the ways division with 0 works, and the other, it doesn't. So if we take 0 and we divide it by 4, you can split nothing in as many ways as you want, and you still get 0. So if we divide 0 by 4, we get 0. So we could say that 0 divided by a is equal to 0, as long as a is not 0. We cannot divide by 0, and I'll explain that in just a moment. Number 3, 4 divided by 0, if we do it the opposite, this is undefined. And I want to explain why. 0 does not have a reciprocal. That's one way to explain it. Because remember I said that two reciprocals multiply up to be 1. Well, there's no way that you can multiply anything by 0. 0 times nothing equals 1. So we cannot divide by 0. And another way of saying this is algebraically. Let's say we define that up here we said 3 times 0 is equal to 0. Right? Well, if I had 3 divided by 0 is equal to some number, If I said 3 divided by 0 is equal to some number, the opposite of dividing by 0 would be multiplying by 0, which is okay. We can multiply by 0. But if we do this, this is saying that there's a number that multiplies by 0 that is equal to 3. And that's a no-no. We can't do that. So we say any number divided by 0 is undefined. And I'm also going to have to throw out there that a cannot be 0. And the reason if a is 0 is way outside the scope of calculus. So we're not going to discuss what happens if we have 0 divided by 0. Okay, so let's look at some examples. But for right now, you can assume that any division by 0 is undefined. We can't do it. So what if I have 0 divided by 16.376? What is that? It is 0. You can split 0 into as many ways as you want, and you'll still get 0. What if I have 41 3/8, and I'm going to divide that by 0? What is that? We call that undefined. It's also, you could also say not possible. That's fine with me too. What is 100 times 0? That is 0. And that is going to conclude the lecture on multiplying and dividing sign numbers. Key points to remember: same sign, positive. Different sign, negative. This is only with multiply and divide. Same sign, positive. Different sign, negative. I appreciate you watching. The next video, the next lesson in this series is going to discuss exponents. I look forward to seeing you then. Until then, happy studies.